It felt like my ability to survive on this encounter was out of my control. But in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, what happens on a 28? We proceed to wipe over and over and over. Assassination does not have good ad damage. This felt real shitty. There are clearly deficiencies that I bring to the table, but I feel like I've hit the ceiling playing assassination. I don't see a clear way forward. And we're back. After a short hiatus, we are back and turning a new leaf as we commit to the Outlaw grind. Although not before Raid, where we finally take down Smolderon and then begin prog on the Birdman. After Raid, we send a few lower level Outlaw keys. The affixes this week are Tyran, Afflicted, Bolstering, which isn't great, but this means it's a good time to get comfy with Outlaw. And while most of these keys go off pretty smooth, we do have an Iridikron kill that was a little too close for comfort. Oh my god. Yo. The next day we send some more Tindril prog, and this boss is wild. I don't think I've ever progged a boss with pulls this fast. Afterwards, we jump into a 25 throne, and this isn't false advertising. Pretty much every other key this week I queued up as Outlaw, so I'm not sure what convinced me to go Sin here. Maybe I wanted the PI, I don't know. But, and perhaps it's a sign, we brick this key anyways. We wipe in the last boss to not clearing the pools on the ground. But the keyholder wants to finish the dungeon, so we end up running it back a second time. After our last attempt, we were kind of at odds for what we thought went wrong. Some of the people in our group thought we should be on the same side when dropping the pools, whereas some other people, myself included, didn't think it mattered as long as you dropped your pool next to an existing one. And this difference in opinion leads to this moment. You're fucking crazy, priest. If I hadn't fainted here, I would have for sure died with that grip. Then our Ellie Shaman stops clearing early, so we don't clear the goop in the room, which leads to us wiping once more. We don't try for a third time, so that's the end of it. But we're back the next day, and this time sticking with Outlaw. And perhaps, as an appropriate segue following the last week's episode, we queue into a 25 Everbloom. For this run, we're going to jump to the second boss, where we lose both our Boomkin and Mage just as Telu goes down. Thankfully, the monk has B-res bracers, so they're able to pick up our druid, who then grabs the mage, and we finish off the fight. We have one more death on the way to the third boss, and if you recall the cook I had been talking up regarding what I need to do to survive on this fight as assassination, well, it turns out, at this key level, pretty much all of that might as well go out the window, because this spec is beefy. It's crazy how safe I feel playing Outlaw. With all the extra DR you gain from your gear, talents, and the cooldown reduction that gets applied to both feint and evasion, it feels like I can live just about anything. Clearing Archmage Soul leads into the final boss, where we do have one death during the Stomp plus add overlap, but aside from that, we have a clean kill, and even beyond the tankiness of the spec, we can see the strengths of Outlaw coming through looking at add damage. As a general rule, the faster you can kill off the Flourishing Ancients, the better. We then queue back up with the Druid into a 26 Wake Rest. And in standard tyrannical Wake Rest fashion, we brick the second boss as our tank gets slapped and we aren't able to recover. We don't try again, so that's key. Next, I decide I'm warmed up enough to the point to queue up my Keystone, and so we link up with an evoker friend of mine and run the 27 Dark Art. And little did I know, this dungeon would be the start of a very depressing sequence of keys. So buckle up. On one of the earlier trash pulls, the Shaman and I both go down pretty quick to... I'm not sure what exactly. So we run it back, and then later that same pull, our evoker bleeds out to the cat debuff. But after this point, we have a mostly smooth run up until Oakheart, where, unfortunately, our evoker isn't able to live the Shattered Earth casts, meaning they go down a couple times, before our tank then also goes down and we're out of battle reses. The timer in Darkheart is kinda tight, so us wiping here, and especially right after lusting, means we don't have enough time and hence we call it there. Now, I was in comms with our Evoker at the time, and he just straight up did not know Shattered Earth would one-shot him. I don't play Evoker, but I believe he had been using Rescue for the sake of the tank, but at this high of a key level, I think the move is to rescue somebody just before Shattered Earth because of the Absorb Shield it gives you. So we're going to run back to 26, and while the footage is going, I want to talk a bit about one-shot mechanics at high keystone levels, because there are a lot. If you're somebody newer to the high keystone level scene, a super helpful resource you can use, and one that I definitely use often, is an app called the Not Even Close. Shout out to Ortimist, the author of this application. It lets you enter information and stats about your character, and you can see what you may or may not need to use to live certain mechanics. Super helpful tool, especially if you're pugging. I would say it's borderline crucial to ensure that you can survive all mechanics on your own. If you're having to rely on pugs for you to survive something, it's probably not gonna go well. Anyways, moving on to the 26. I think our tank butt pulls the bear in the corner, and while we try playing it, without lust and all of our cooldowns, we're not able to get through this pull, so we're going to chain die before eventually wiping here. Moving on to the first boss, our Evoker is the only ranged player baiting the leap, but they're also not the tankiest of specs on their own, so they end up rotting out to one of the bleeds. The tank is our only B-res and they get them back up, but they're in a nightmare pool, so when the Evoker accepts, they immediately die. And then we rot out to this boss. Because we had a rough start, we're really behind pace, so we don't bother trying and run back to 25. This time, after seeing our Evoker fall over to the first boss, I decided I wanted another ranged DPS to help bait, and somebody other than the tank that had a B-res. So we end up grabbing Sally Slammer the Lock. Awesome name, by the way. And I don't know how you guys feel about these kinds of notes, but I like seeing them, because I think it shows they're aware of their class and capabilities. In this case, it might seem simple listing that you're a B-res, but like it shows you will use that ability. When I can confidently say I've played with people that have a B-res and don't use it. We end up having a clean run up until the first boss, where I get downright assassinated by the tank. And as the Warlock tries to B-res me, they stand in the nightmare pool and get leapt on. We still have a lot of the boss's health to go, so I make the decision to not take the B-res and make the call to run it back and go again. We played the first section of Trash super well, so compared with the previous 27 and 26 we attempted earlier, we can afford to have a wipe here. Except the Warlock just gives up. I try to convince them to stay and that we're doing fine for time, but they just flat out refuse and leave the group. So that means we're doing the 24. And you know, I could just give up, but now it's personal. It's like 2 AM in the morning. I don't care about score or anything, I just have to time this key. So we rope in another guildie of ours to come DPS and make our way through the dungeon. Having a pretty clean run, no major wipes at least, and we make it to the last boss with enough time to finish the key. Except we're going to wipe, and unfortunately we don't have time for a second attempt. So it's 3 AM and we're now doing the 23. And with it being a 23, we are blasting through this dungeon. But on the second boss, our healer is going to disconnect. So we wait around for a few minutes, but it looks like they aren't coming back. So I call GG's, and literally, as our tank is hearthing out, they come back online. It's like the key's alive. He released too? Ain't no way, dude. If you're wondering why I was laughing at the shaman releasing, it's because we were all waiting at the boss ready to res him, but as if their DC wasn't long enough, them releasing added like another 30 seconds or something. And we're kind of torn over whether we can still time the dungeon, but we decide to give it a shot, and we make it to the final boss with just under 3.5 minutes remaining. Which is pretty sus, but it looks like we're on pace as we get the boss to 55% with 2 minutes remaining. But then I disconnect. And when I come back, it turns out we in fact did not time the key. So it's now like 4 AM, I'm completely gone, but if there's any upside here, it's that I'm pretty well practiced as Outlaw in this dungeon. At least it seems like I'm doing okay damage. And you might have noticed the Monk is still here, and especially the Evoker, all the way from the 27. Neither of them needed these dungeons, and I did say they were welcome to leave, but they stuck it out, so we do appreciate that. Additionally, the Monk drags his tank friend in, and we pug a hunter and finally time the dungeon, on a deathless run to boot. I immediately log off to recover from whatever it was I just experienced, but we're back the next day doing a quick Wrath raid before diving into some keys. We queue up a 26 fall with some guildies and a funky comp. In particular, with double rogue AUG, I figured there was no way we kill the last boss with 2 outlaw rogues, so I go back to assassination, but we're not going to make it there because we wipe to the 3rd boss as the rogue and evoker rot out. We go again, but we realize we don't really have enough time for the last boss, so we instead run back to 25. I think that since it's a lower key, it's probably safe for me to play Outlaw, but as it turns out, double Outlaw AUG is definitely not the move for Iridikron, as we wipe during the burn phase and don't have enough time to go again. We then take a quick break for Alt-Heroic raid before hopping back on the rogue and pugging into a 26 Everbloom, which goes surprisingly well, until the 3rd boss that is, where our tank dies and so does the rest of our group. We don't have time to try again, so that is GG. I then link up with some guildies and a tank friend of ours to run some more keys, rerunning the 26 Everbloom. But our tank is going to get absolutely slammed in this dungeon. Bolstering Everbloom is not fun, so we deplete and run the 25, which goes smoother, but we then pull Witherbark with 2 of our party outside the room. I don't think they realized we were pulling the flowers into boss, so we wipe and go again. And on our 2nd attempt, I'm going to disconnect. So not ideal. It takes me a few minutes to reconnect, at which point we're just too far behind, so we call it there. Afterwards, the crew dips out, and I turn to LFG to run a 27 fall. We're going to wipe to the 2nd boss to our shaman standing in the wrong section, but we run it back, and while we lose our shaman once more when they're caught moving during a dispel, we have a battle res to get them back up and finish the fight. Then moving towards the 3rd boss, rogues are great for this fight because they can vanish the corrosion debuff, arguably the most dangerous mechanic for this fight, and prevent it from going out entirely. But Outlaw in particular has an advantage over the other rogue specs, because of its built-in CDR that also happens to affect vanish. This means they can, in theory, vanish every single corrosion debuff in phases 2 and 3. Now this debuff may target other party members, so it's not a guaranteed thing, but when you get picked and you have vanish available, it feels real good. I show an example of that here during phase 1. Going into phase 2, the timing works out such that if you use vanish on cooldown with the application of the debuff, it's usually back up in time for the next debuff. Now, this may vary depending on procs, roll the bones, and your adrenaline rush uptime, but if you play it well, you can pretty reliably have vanish available when it matters, aka when a new corrosion debuff goes out. So when our shaman gets picked, I vanish for damage knowing it will be back up in time for the next debuff. And sure enough, right as my vanish comes off cooldown, I get targeted and vanish the cast. And as luck would have it, we're going to get picked and vanish every single remaining cast. Insane, 4 times in a row on this 3rd boss. Which is some crazy RNG. Or well, I think it's RNG. Recently I've heard there may be a way to manipulate who gets targeted by this ability to then guarantee one person gets targeted for the rest of the fight. But I don't know exactly how this works, if it works. Anyways, with the vanish tech, the 3rd boss is a breeze, and we engage Iridikron with about 7.5 minutes left. Which sounds like a lot of time, but this is a long fight. However, we make it to the burn phase with about 1.5 minutes remaining, but our healer is pretty ooh. And while it seems like they get their mana back during the phase, we're going to slowly rot out. I definitely should have health potted here, and I had a few more defensive options with Feint and Crimson Vial available, but those are globals I'd be sacrificing for damage, and we needed those globals because we were not on pace to beat the timer. You also might have noticed we still had the Sated debuff going into the burn, it falls off a little too late for us to take advantage of, which definitely would have helped. So that's another deplete. It's been a rough string of keys, but we stay positive and a bit later queue into a 27 Blackrook. This dungeon is one of the best keys to try and push up, so surely things go well here. And, as it turns out, we absolutely crush this dungeon. The Havoc Demon Hunter is doing like a billion DPS. I think I'm putting out some good damage myself, and this pally is pulling with passion. We play a full trash pack into the first boss, and with the tempo we were playing at, we could have very easily timed a 28, maybe even a 29, assuming we can survive. And this is with multiple deaths over the course of the run. But in talking about surviving, we're really referring to the final boss here. At this keystone level, despite Outlaw being tanky, Shadowbolt still one-shot me. So I need to pre-defensive every set. Thankfully, I can always have feint or evasion up, so that part is a non-issue, but ironically, after I just finished talking about how great Outlaw is for Blight of Galakrond, it definitely struggles on this boss. Any fights with forced downtime really hurt this spec, meaning the intermissions that have me running in circles are not ideal. You can sort of plan around it to some extent, but at this point I haven't learned how to do that very well, so we're not doing a whole lot of damage. Thankfully, this DH is still doing a billion DPS, carrying the damage such that we're able to cruise through this fight and finally time a key, netting ourselves 5 Mythic plus score. That's going to be our final key for the night, but we're back the following day for a 26 Blackrook that we cruise through before heading into a 27 Darkheart. In this one, we're going to rack up a few deaths to the trash before the first boss. In particular, on one of the trash pulls, we're going to turbo bolster 4 Nightclaws, which then proceed to absolutely wreck our group. Otherwise, we're going to jump to the first boss, where our Ret Paladin is going to fall over after standing on the ground stuff. So we get them back up, but then our tank is going to die during Primal Rage, and that's key. We run back to 26, having a pretty clean run up until the final boss, where I'm going to go down a couple times to a swirly I just straight up don't see. However, thankfully, because we've had a clean run, we have a couple battle reses saved up, so I come back from the dead and we finish the fight. Except we're short on trash, which is super bad in this dungeon, because the only way out is by talking to Malfurion, which you can only do after like 30 seconds of RP. But it's all good, we have the time to spare, and after killing one more trash mob, we push our rating to 3420. The key turns into a 27 throne, so in we go with the same group. And this is a tough key, especially on bolstering. We're all in a Discord call coordinating stops, but we end up having nearly a full wipe to the first trash pull. Once we ran out of AoE stops, our tank calls for kicks, but the monk and I are going to kick the same mob, meaning the cast on me goes through. And without me there, the rest of our group is going to rot out. A little while later then, during the next big hallway pull, we're going to lose our tank to some big bolstered sentinels. But the 4 of us managed to kite out and kill off the remaining 2 adds. And we're going to have a few more one-off deaths to the trash before making it to the first boss, where I'm going to go down to the guard's melee during the second intermission. And this is fully my fault, but it's still a little frustrating, because I have tricks up the moment I attack the guard. You would think it should make a beeline straight for our tank, but I think what's actually happening is the moment it becomes targetable, it proximity aggroes to me, and because I'm in melee range of the ad, it instantly has an attack queued up that one-taps me. And I'm pretty sure this attack is literally instant, so it doesn't matter how fast I hit the guard with tricks, it will always be faster than me. So the solution is to just not be near the guard. With tricks up, my first attack on the guard needs to be a ranged one, or I need to start by attacking the witches. These mobs actually have the same interaction, but the first ability they queue the moment they spawn is a frostbolt, which can be kicked. But we have B-res, so I get back up and we finish off this boss, and then the second boss before heading over to the totem dude. Now, after the second boss, we don't really think we have enough time to finish off the run, but I really wanted to try the totem boss because on Tyrannical, this dude's flame shocks hurt, and I thought it would be good for our group to see the fight at least once to see if it was doable, and to get some practice in before running the 26. And I think it was a good thing we did so, because while we do end up wiping here, as our tank is going to go down during a totem, it gives us a chance to talk through our defensives and I think be a little more prepared, such that when we run back the 26 with a cleaner run, we're able to take this boss down. We then clear through the trash and final boss with a couple more deaths. But it's clean enough and we time the key, gaining a Mythic Plus score. That key becomes a 27 fall, which we absolutely crush. Also with our comp, the third boss is so free. Between my Vanish and the Hunter's Feigned Death, we don't get a single debuff for all of phases 2 and 3. So we make it to Iridikron with 9 minutes left, which is plenty of time to finish this boss. But, and unfortunately, on what should be our final group soak, Chromie is going to go down. It turns out our healer did not heal the little gnome. And it wasn't a mana thing, they just straight up forgot to heal it. So, unlucky, but it happens. And that's actually going to be our final key for the week. Unlike the last couple episodes, we don't gain a whole lot of score this week, but we did take advantage of the opportunity to learn a new spec. And I can say in confidence, I'm feeling a whole lot better about Outlaw. There are still times where I feel like my damage, especially in single target, isn't where I'd like it to be. And if I ever need to really focus on dungeon mechanics, my damage definitely falls off a cliff. But, and unlike Assassination, where I felt like I hit a ceiling by encountering problems I couldn't solve, as Outlaw, these efficiencies in my gameplay are things that can be worked on. And considering we're still timing 26s, I think it's a good sign this may just be the spec I commit to for the title push. But that's going to do it. Be sure to drop a like and subscribe if you made it this far, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.